It's a day that the world has been looking forward to. The leaders of the United States and North Korea finally met at Sentosa Island in Singapore. President Trump and Kim Jong-un made history, becoming the first sitting US and North Korean leaders to meet and shake hands. They're seeking to end a tense, decades-old nuclear standoff. The two men strode towards one another at the Capella Hotel in Singapore's Sentosa. They shared a handshake with the flags of both the nations in the backdrop before sitting down for a half day of meetings with ramifications, for the whole world. Ahead of the meeting, the American president took to Twitter to say, quote, "The fact that I am having a meeting is a major loss for the US, say the haters and losers. We have our hostages, testing, research and all missile launches have stopped. And these pundits who have called me wrong from the beginning have nothing else they can say. We will be fine," end quote. Now, the two leaders struck an optimistic note before the meeting.
We're going to have a great discussion, and I think tremendous success. We'll be tremendously successful. And it's my honor, and we will have a terrific relationship, I have no doubt.
Well,
it was not easy to get here.
우리한테는 우리 발목을 잡는 그 과거가 있고 또 그릇된 국민과 발행들이 우리 때로는 우리 눈과 귀를 가리고 있었는데 우리 모든 것을 이겨내고 이 자리까지 왔습니다.
The past worked as fetters on our wings, and the old prejudices and practices worked as obstacles on our way forward, but we overcame all of them and we are here today.
That's true.
The one-on-one meeting between the two lasted for just under 45 minutes, following which they were joined by delegates from both countries for a second round of discussions. The two leaders then broke for lunch after the first round of discussions. That is where they are currently. It's a working lunch, as it's being described, that's underway. And with me on the broadcast right now to talk more about this historic meeting in the studio with me is Ambassador Arun Singh. He's India's former ambassador to the United States, among many other positions that he's held. With us all the way from the United States, if I'm not wrong, is Andrei Abramovich. He is, of course, a commentator on inter-Korean relations. Gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you both for joining us on the broadcast. It's good morning, actually. I'm already on Singapore time, it seems. Andre, there's a lot that's happening in Singapore. Everyone's been talking about the handshake. Before we get into the nitty-gritties, though, your first thoughts on what's been transpiring on Sentosa since this morning?
Yeah, well, the two men met each other and seemed extremely relaxed, very comfortable. They're both showmen in a very real sense, and did not seem at all overwhelmed by the moment, and seemed to have an immediate rapport, touching each other, smiling. It was a good start, I would say.
All right, and I apologize for mispronouncing your last name. It's Andrei Abrahamian. Ambassador Singh, would you agree that in terms of the optics, we've gotten exactly what we were hoping for? Warmth, optimism, handshakes, and of course, not hugs just yet, but even a description from President Trump, quite non-presidential if you ask me, calling it, already calling it an excellent relationship in the first couple of minutes of their meeting.
I think so far the meetings and the start of the process has gone off as well as anybody could have anticipated. There have been no negative reports coming out. They had their one-on-one meeting, they had the delegation level talk, and now they are into the working lunch. And if you look carefully at the choreography of their first meeting, in terms of protocol, it is being deliberately signaled, and perhaps the North Koreans would have insisted more on that, is that they are equals. It was not that President Trump was sitting in a room and the North Korean leader came there and was received by President Trump. But it was choreographed in a way that as equals, they walked towards each other.
Right.
And I think so that's a very important signal, perhaps also as a signal of reassurance to North Korea that they are being given a certain status and going forward in terms of the security of the regime, which is what they will want as part of this process. Again, the choreography and the messaging stands out in contrast with what happened at the G7 meeting.
Yes.
Because there are photographs coming out of President Trump's meetings with the Canadian Prime Minister, with other leaders, where he's not as warm, where he's seen as scowling, where he's seen as uncomfortable, where he's not seen as accommodating what they've been asking. And here there's a firm handshake, and then President Trump reaches out to the North Korean leader with his other hand.
And that's what's happening even now as the two of them have walked out. They are keeping pace with one another. Neither is walking ahead of the other. President Trump and Kim Jong-un have just emerged from that working lunch. Remember, it's approximately 12:30 p.m., just after 12:30 p.m. in Singapore. We're given to understand that Kim Jong-un is heading back to North Korea around 2 p.m. local time, Singapore. Now, this is extremely interesting because I don't see their translators next to one another. So I guess this is just basically a photo opportunity where the two of them are putting up smiling faces. I'm not sure if they're being able to understand what the other is saying. President Trump, of course, gesturing to some foliage there. Great visuals like they were when President Moon Jae-in of South Korea and Kim Jong-un met at the DMZ earlier. Let's listen in.
Really very positive. I think better than anybody could have expected. Top of the line. Really good.
We're going right now for a signing.
What are you signing?
Chairman, do you have any comments about denuclearization?
What are you signing, sir? We're going to be announcing that in a couple of minutes. Mr. Kim, will you
Mr. Kim?
President Trump keeping everyone guessing there. He says things went great, that things were phenomenal, and that the two of them are now headed to a quote-unquote signing. One of the reporters there asked him, "What are you going to be signing, sir?" And he responded by saying, "You'll be hearing the announcement shortly." So there you have it, the two men on whom the world is focused this morning. Remember, this is prime time in the United States. Andre, I suppose everyone is tuned in to this meeting, whichever side you may be on. And just speaking about what happened at the G7 summit, you know, it was being called G6+1 because of the way the other countries seem to have aligned themselves against President Trump following the trade tariffs. But if I can ask you, does President Trump, if we are to look at this, you know, from his perspective, doesn't Kim Jong-un pose the bigger challenge for him? He is the person who everyone has been trying to, you know, bring onto the negotiating table, and it is Donald Trump who's managed to do that.
Yeah, well, you know, Donald Trump's style is so unique, and he has so little interest in the norms of diplomacy or really even the standards of international relations between states. And when it comes to the G7 and many other of the relationships that the United States has really taken care to maintain over decades and decades, that's had a lot of really negative impact, I think you have to say. We haven't seen strains between the United States and Australia or France or Britain or South Korea or Japan like this for a long, long time. The flip side of that may well be that his lack of interest in doing things a normal way has created this breakthrough where I think any other president, I can't imagine Hillary Clinton having dived into this and created the space to really perhaps transform the relationship between the United States and North Korea. So his unique style, it's come with a lot of costs, but maybe in this one case, he's opening the door.
Again, though, Ambassador, whether or not it's going to pay dividend is something that will only be determined in the long term. I mean, short term, sure, this looks great, but long term is really what we're looking at.
That's true, but at the same time, one has to acknowledge that it is President Trump's unconventional style that has enabled this meeting to take place. Most other US presidents would have asked for a process, lower level discussions, perhaps revival of the 6+1 talks on Korea, and only at the end of that, see whether there should be a presidential level meeting. And as part of that, something could have stalled down the line. So he has certainly, because of his unconventional manner, enabled this to happen. Now, whether this has long-term sustainability is a different matter that has to be assessed.
Right. And Andre, would it be fair to say also that we're finding a lot of the US allies sort of catching up with the United States in terms of the way the talks with North Korea are proceeding? And that perhaps can be said of President Trump's own White House, his own administration, because I don't don't think a lot of people were on board with him when he decided that he would like to negotiate with Kim Jong-un one-on-one, because it does give legitimacy to a dictatorship as it's been described by the United States repeatedly over the years.
Yeah, I mean, and that's been a common critique the last few hours and days and weeks, is that this photo op is exactly what Kim Jong-un wants. It's a great propaganda win. It legitimizes the regime. And those things may be true, but at the end of the day, if we're going to find a breakthrough with North Korea, it's going to take treating them as a sovereign state, which, of course, they are. And so, you know, that criticism for me seems to be it's almost a knee-jerk reaction. It's something that is said. And frankly, it's more important to explore what is possible at this time. And then if it all falls apart, perhaps we can look back and say, well, Kim Jong-un got a photo op, and was that such a high price to pay to explore options for really solving this twisted, difficult relationship?
Fair enough. Just a quick update for our viewers on the visuals. President Trump and Kim Jong-un have parted ways at the Capella Hotel. They've both gone in opposite directions. I'm wondering where that signing is going to take place, whether it's going to happen with both of them present in the same room, or is this going to be separate statements or separate, let's say, press briefings that are going to take place. And I suppose, Ambassador Singh, since we're looking at every small detail about today's meeting, some speculating about the color of President Trump's tie, some speculating about the fact that Kim Jong-un showed up a little sooner than President Trump to show respect to an elder. I'm not sure about that, but just to ask you, will separate statements indicate divergence of some sort, that things didn't go as well as expected? Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, President Trump has spoken of signings. Now let us wait and see what does that mean, because that would normally suggest that there is a joint statement of some kind. But let's wait and see. And if there are separate statements, that would only indicate that they couldn't reach the point through negotiation or being in a position to sign a joint statement. But even if you have a joint statement, and that is certainly one step higher than separate statements, there can be sometimes different interpretations of the language that is there in the joint statement, because sometimes when there is the lack of agreement, you find words that are ambiguous, so that the position of both sides are covered, and then you continue the negotiations subsequently. So we'll have to see what exactly comes out, what is the language there, and then what is the interpretation each side gives to that language in the coming days. So that will be evolving. And again, I thought in the visuals it was interesting, because when he saw first, they were seen as both walking to the car of probably the US president, then walking back from that and having a fairly animated conversation for a while, and then parting ways. So we'll have to see as the information comes out as to what exactly was going on there.
Absolutely, and of course the cars are lining up, the cavalcades are getting prepared. We're still trying to figure out what happens next. The signing was mentioned by none other than President Trump. Let's go across to our man on the ground, WION's associate editor Ramesh Ramachandran, who's right outside the Capella Hotel. You'll probably catch first glimpse, Ramesh, as that cavalcade emerges. But what are you hearing there in Singapore? What exactly is the buzz on the street? Is there going to be a joint communique? That seems to be the popular buzzword at this point in time.
It has been 3 hours and 45 minutes and counting, Aisha, since the handshake between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un at the Capella Hotel behind me across the road. And there is some activity happening around the gate as we speak. The police vehicles could be seen on the roads outside the hotel, which indicates that the meeting has ended or is nearing an end, a completion, and that both leaders can be expected to depart in quick succession, one after the other. Kim arriving first, and expectedly he might be the first to leave as well. Now, we have not yet had a sense as to whether there will be a joint statement or not, or there will be individual statements, but most certainly the American side can be expected to brief the media. But I can say with a fair degree of certainty is that before anything else, Trump will be tweeting about it sooner than later. That's the only thing which we can say with certainty, that Trump will be tweeting something or the other very soon.
Indeed. Interesting times we live in, I suppose, Andre, indicative of the man holding high office in the United States, that whether or not anything else is certain, a tweet certainly is.
The last 18 months or so, I think the statement, at the very least, will indicate a desire to have a process. Excuse me. I've lost the video. Excuse me. But I think a process that will lead to a peace deal, and a lot of the details will be absent, and that will be worked out by delegations from both sides that will continue to meet over the coming weeks and months. So, of course, Trump, very much his style to say, we've got something for you, but you're going to have to wait a few more minutes. That's just how he operates, like a TV personality.
He does do that very often. Ambassador Singh, if we are to go by that, the fact that, you know, the gaps are going to be filled in by the two sides, the delegations, that too is, I'm sure, a matter of concern for North Korea, given two of the people who are involved very closely with this entire process are considered very hawkish on North Korea. I'm talking about Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, who've been sort of strategic in this meeting going through. Is that something, again, that we're going to have to watch out for, the filling in of the gaps in the months to come?
We will certainly have to watch out for that. But I think North Korea, from its point of view, has achieved what it wanted.
Okay.
It has got a summit with the US president, something that has never happened before. It has projected itself as a reasonable country in terms of dealing with issues. And after that, it will work to keep South Korea and China on board, to whittle down on any kind of restrictions that are being posed on economic and trade interactions with North Korea. And that will be their objective. And their aim would be that even if there are difficulties later in whatever has been worked out with the US, to prevent an international coalition to develop with support from Europe, China and others targeting North Korea. And given how President Trump has worked out his relationship with Europe in the context of the G7 or in the context of the Iran nuclear deal, so long as North Korea keeps projecting itself as reasonable, it will be very difficult for the US to build another international coalition of sanctions against North Korea. So given that, whatever may be the difficulty in their implementation on the specific understanding with the US, I think North Korea has largely achieved its purpose.
Absolutely. Ramesh, that's so true. I mean, if we're looking at the way the North has approached these talks, even after President Trump shot off that letter saying that the summit stands cancelled, the response from North Korea was quite measured when we compare it to, you know, the diatribes from last year. Do you think that that has also demonstrated in many ways how very masterfully Kim Jong-un has emerged as the grand puppeteer, if you will, of all of this? He's been very nimble-footed and dexterous in how he's approached this entire summit.
Absolutely. Both sides will appropriate this summit meeting to their own advantage. The takeaways will be interpreted and explained to their domestic constituents in their own way. Both America and the North Korean side will give a spin on the summit proceedings, each trying to project its own understanding or interpretation of what has happened, transpired in a summit meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. But the fact remains that there are contentious issues which remain very much on the table. There is no apparent bridging of gaps, so to speak. Both sides holding on to their respective positions. What will be interesting to watch going forward is how quickly can these two sides come together for the second round of talks at whichever level they feel appropriate to take this momentum forward. Now, as we speak, there's movement happening behind me, as you can see, with traffic policemen and others standing near the gate of the Capella Hotel, all in expectation, anticipation of the leaders departing for their respective hotels. Trump putting up at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore City, and Kim Jong-un at the St. Regis Hotel. And both hotels are located barely 15 or 20 minutes drive away from the Capella Hotel here on Sentosa Island. So things are coming to an end, if not already, and we are waiting to hear from the American side as to what transpired in that summit meeting. We are waiting, standing by for a briefing from the American side or a press statement, whichever comes earlier. So let's wait and watch as to what the outcome of the talks have been.
Right. Andre's CVID, complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization, is what the United States has been harping on from the very beginning. But that is a huge ask for North Korea, especially given, the US's precedent in the past, dealing with countries like Iraq, pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, and just days ago deciding to not even sign the G7 communique. So one can understand North Korea's apprehensions when it comes to dealing with the US.
Yeah, and it is. I don't think it is quite fair to say that the gap has not closed between the two sides. I mean, CVID rapidly was the U.S. position. Just a few weeks ago, some of the administration calling for CVID by 2020, in a year and a half. And the North Koreans' position not too long ago was, we will never give up our nuclear weapons ever under any circumstances. So already you've seen the Pompeo and Trump say things like, we can do this slowly, the North Koreans can take their time. And the North Koreans, of course, for their part, have been saying denuclearization. An important thing to emerge today, though, is what exactly that is supposed to mean. And hopefully that is in whatever document the two leaders are about to sign. Because North Korea tends to talk about denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, meaning denuclearization of the U.S., at least in that region. And the United States means denuclearization of North Korea. So it'll be interesting to see what they've come up with today and in the lead up. Could be any minute we'll be finding out.
Yeah, let's hope so. I mean, President Trump has promised and not delivered before. Let's hope there is something that's going to come out of this that we can actually get to read. But the Bonhomme ambassador saying on display right now, what would prove to be the damp squib after all of this? What's the worst case scenario, in your opinion, from today's summit, if we are to just look at everything that's happened so far and building up to what we are hoping is going to come out of this?
Both the leaders wanted to deliberately project comfort and bonhomie, and I think they managed to do that. I think going from here, the problems would arise in terms of US expectation of the process that North Korea would lead towards what would be described as denuclearization, in terms of limits on its capacities, in terms of stopping any kind of activity that could lead to further development of nuclear capacity, in terms of inspection regimes. And I think what the US would want ideally would be a very strict inspection regime, because one of the reasons that was used for criticizing the Iran nuclear deal was that it didn't have a sufficiently strong inspection regime that the new administration was comfortable with. So the inspection regime that comes out is less strict than the one that was done in the case of Iran. Then President Trump would come in under criticism and the new administration. So many would compare what comes out here with the kind of agreement that had earlier been reached with Iran, and what is the difference. So in terms of these commitments for the process that North Korea may have undertaken, people will wait to see how that plays out. And if that doesn't play out, then the US may feel some compulsion to take measures of cutting back on any kind of assistance that may be promised, or sanctions in North Korea. From North Korea's perspective, if they feel that the economic easing, removal of sanctions, normalizing of economic trade interactions is not happening as fast as they would like, and that their people are not benefiting from this, the government and the country is not benefiting from this, they may slow back on some of their commitments. And once distrust starts building, then the process can take any direction, because the 1994 agreement collapsed because both sides started distrusting each other. So once that starts, then it's a way downhill.
Okay. And Andre, I mean, I don't think it escapes anyone's notice that this is being played out for domestic audiences for both these individuals. Do you feel, going by how, the media reports at least indicated that Kim Jong-un, for instance, was worried about a coup while he's out in Singapore. That was one of the main nervous factors for him about the Singapore summit, and that he's also trying to build a more friendly image of his country going forward. Are these pulls and pressures that the North Korean leader is feeling for the first time perhaps in his family's regime, and is prompting him to reach out to the United States?
Well, there's a lot of speculation about domestic politics in North Korea, always, particularly recently. Kim, just over a week ago, removed 3 top military personnel and replaced them, which is an unusual move leading right up to this summit, which led again to wild speculation about what it might mean. The fact is, we don't really know. it's clear that there are some constituencies among the North Korean elite that will be very nervous about something like this. The United States is the old enemy, and this young leader is doing God knows what in Singapore. But there will be a huge constituency that will be very much in favor of this. Certainly the business community in Pyongyang is extremely excited by the prospect of sanctions removal and a normal relationship with the United States and with the West. And so Kim Jong-un has proved adept at dealing with elite politics over the last 6 or 7 years, and I don't think there's a reason to think that he's lost his grip now. As for Donald Trump, he has a certain percentage of the U.S. media very much on his side, no matter what he does. Even the media that is more critical of him, though, has been, I'd say, at least cautiously optimistic or neutral in its coverage of the summit today. Nobody wants to be cynical, I think, quite yet, although everyone is ready to be at the first sign that things are going wobbly.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Going by the reports coming out of the US, it has been quite balanced in terms of looking at this meeting. In fact, I was mentioning earlier that even President Clinton, Ambassador Singh, on a late night show had said that Americans need to support President Trump in his endeavor here in trying to broker peace with North Korea. And I guess that is really speaking the takeaway over here, that there could be peace that could be brought to a very fraught relationship between the US and North Korea, but also North Korea and South Korea.
Of course, and you may remember that in 2003, President George Bush had described 3 countries as what he called the axis of evil.
Yes.
Iran, Iraq and North Korea. After that, the US had invaded Iraq. And of course, developments there didn't quite go in the direction the US had wanted, and things became very, very complicated. President Obama tried to move forward with Iran and work out an agreement, try and work out a more normal set of interactions with that country, and President Trump has pushed that process back. Now the third country in the list, North Korea, President Trump is trying to move forward in a positive direction with that. And as outside observers, as people involved in development of peace and security in the wider region, certainly we would wish that the process is taken forward in a way that there is de-escalation of tension, there is normalization of situation in the Korean Peninsula, there is focus on economic and development related activity. But we have to see how that process evolves. There will be pitfalls. But then after this, the question still remains as to how the new administration will deal with the issue in Iran.
Right.
And that becomes a question mark today.
Indeed, it does. So all 3 countries, Iraq, Iran and North Korea, sort of getting at least tick-marked, I'd say, by successive presidents. Ramesh Ramachandran also with us from Sentosa Island. Ramesh, we're looking at visuals emerge from their working lunch. There was a moment when the 2 of them walked up to the US president's car. The door was open, they had a peek inside, and then they sort of walked away and then parted ways. Now, of course, we're waiting for that statement. I was just describing those visuals for our viewers. But very quickly to you, Ramesh, now, I was just wondering, we've talked so much about President Trump and Kim Jong-un today because they are, of course, the protagonists of what's going on. But there is another person who's been sort of a linchpin, so to speak, for this to happen, and that is President Moon Jae-in of South Korea. He has really acted as let's say, the catalyst to this chemical reaction. And he must be one who is watching things very closely and hoping that the joint statement addresses South Korea's concerns.
Absolutely. Moon Jae-in was supposed to be here, Aisha, in Singapore, to be here on the margins of the Trump-Kim summit, but he decided against coming here in the interest of allowing these 2 leaders to size each other up and get to meet each other for the very first time. But he's keeping a hawk's eye view on the developments here in Singapore, back at the Capella Hotel, where the talks have ended between Trump and Kim Jong-un. But the fact remains that, let's admit it, Moon Jae-in did the heavy lifting. He has shepherded this peace process all by himself. right from the day he came to power in the middle of last year. And since then, he's made consistent efforts to forge peace and understanding with North Korea on the Korean Peninsula issue, and also to bring about a reconciliation between a grand bargain, so to speak, between the US and North Korea as well. So he's the man to watch out for, and he will be meeting Kim Jong-un later this year, and he can be expected to discuss with other world leaders, including, as I mentioned, he will be traveling to Russia to meet with President Vladimir Putin, and he will be coming to India sometime in July next month, tentatively for talks with Prime Minister Modi. So he is in the thick of action. He is watching things intently from the sidelines, and he has literally a great deal of at stake here, in vested interest in seeing that the two leaders here, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, have a relatively successful meeting, a success, not a complete disaster.